Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast, the podcast all about the delicate balance between people and business, and quite literally reconnecting the two. My name is Tracy Rubin, and I've spent nearly my entire professional career in HR. Join me as I share stories, opinions, and words of advice with you each week. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for another week. This week's episode is all about pop culture. Interestingly enough, I watch a lot of shows. If you ask my husband, I watch too many shows. I am an avid consumer of The Real Housewives, Bravo in general, but also I really like the show Selling Sunset on Netflix. And what's interesting to me about Selling Sunset is that it is absolutely a reality TV show, but it's also like pretty scripted, I think. Anyway, I like it because, you get to see incredible, amazing, beautiful homes and you get a touch of drama. And, for me, when I'm watching a show, I want to not think about anything in my own life, right? Like I want to completely disconnect and just kind of binge TV that makes me feel better about myself. I don't know, that's kind of sounds terrible, but it is what it is. So that is what these shows do for me. And I bring this up because I've been watching the new season of Selling Sunset. There might be some spoilers in this episode. Okay. And in the season, I'm not done yet. I don't even know where I am in the season, honestly. Actually, I just finished the last episode before the reunion. So actually, I'm remembering now that I like binge watched, I don't know how many episodes last night. Anyway, so you're definitely going to hear some spoilers here, but it's not going to ruin the show. We can all predict what's happening in the show if you're watching. And I want to preface too, like if you don't listen or watch these shows, you will still be able to relate to what I'm sharing today. I just am trying to bring a different perspective and an HR perspective to the shows we watch. Anyway, so in this season, we see a lot of the drama unfolding in the interpersonal relationships in the Oppenheim Group office. It sounds so funny to me that I'm talking about a show on my podcast, but whatever. So, what's interesting is there are a lot of moments where the relationships between the agents is are I guess the relationships are just really, really toxic and there's a lot of drama and it becomes hard to manage. And so we see in the season where Mary gets promoted to manager of the office, I think it's the LA office, and she talks about the struggles that she's experiencing and the challenges that she's experiencing in this new role as a manager. And I could only think about, gosh, like imagine if they had an HR person there to kind of help relieve some of the burdens of managing a really difficult group of people. And obviously the show might not be so realistic. Like it's all women in the office. They are all really, really talented. I mean, we see a little bit of like bottom performance and top performers in the season, but in general, I mean, there's a reason why the cast is curated, right? They're literally called a cast. So we know that there's a very specific angle that Netflix takes when casting these shows because obviously it has to be entertaining. So anyway, throughout the season we see this, push and pull of the challenges that Mary is confronted with, especially related to conduct. And so I wanted to bring this up because I think it begs the question of how we deal with people, individuals who are extremely unprofessional and really difficult to deal with. And so I'm thinking about Christine, the one agent in the show, who I don't know is always in the wrong. Like you can definitely see throughout the season where she's kind of ganged up on, and that's unprofessional. And then she provokes more of this, toxic environment, and she kind of brings it on herself, but then she also treats people that way. So you're seeing this kind of play out where people are not in a good environment. Like this environment is definitely challenged. And then her managers, specifically Jason Oppenheim, who is the broker and the owner of this brokerage, and Mary, who is the newly promoted manager of the LA office, where they're struggling to manage her behavior and struggling to manage just the connections between all of the agents. So, one thing that I'll say is that when we are dealing with a difficult personality, a difficult person, someone who's acting unprofessionally, there are some things that I think they did really well and some things that I think they missed the mark on. So, when dealing with someone like that, you have to be very, very buttoned up. Very buttoned up. Like there is no room for error there. You have to be 100% on your A game. And it's not easy because we're all human beings, right? We all are going to make mistakes. We're going to feel emotions. We're going to react. But with someone like that, you have to have all of your T's crossed and all of your I's dotted. And that's really because, a person who is acting unprofessionally and thinks that that's okay and doesn't necessarily take accountability for their behavior and their piece in all of this, they are probably going to turn things around onto you. Maybe there will be a little bit of gaslighting. Like there are going to be those toxic behaviors ensuing beyond that. So that's the one thing. The second thing is that when you're dealing with someone like this, you have to have boundaries and repercussions because bad behavior only gets worse if it's not managed. So something that I think they did well was they, said, "Hey, this is not tolerable. We can't act like this. Things need to be professional." Where I think there was room for improvement was actually in a discussion that Mary had with Christine, where she allowed herself to become very emotional and she wasn't guiding the conversation. She kind of allowed Christine to guide the conversation. And when you're dealing with someone whose conduct is subpar, where you're trying to manage their behavior and hold them accountable, you have to be the one in control of the conversation. So there's definitely something here to Mary being a new manager, right? When you're a new manager, you're not necessarily given or you don't necessarily have all of the tools to effectively, manage people unless you have that experience. I don't know what Mary's experience is with managing, but considering she's been a real estate agent, I think her entire career, this is probably her first time managing people with a specific title rather than just, leading by example, for example. So, for someone who is new in a managerial role, managing people is a very difficult thing. It's also a skill set that you develop over time, right? But this means that she's going into this situation with a very difficult person to manage and poor conduct that she has to manage now. She's going into that with not a whole lot of guidance and definitely not a whole lot of experience or training. So we see this conversation unfolding into something that I would say was also unprofessional. I think if I were, the mediator in this conversation, and if you watch the season, it's like kind of midway through where they sit down and they are at a cafe, and which actually is a great approach when you're dealing with someone who, like over the course of months and months and months continues to have poor behavior, but taking that person out of their typical environment is a great strategy. So that was a good thing, but they're sitting at a cafe and they're engaging in this conversation, but you can see and feel that Mary becomes emotional. She's starting to unravel. She's using very subjective terminology, talking about herself. And when you're dealing with someone whose conduct is not meeting expectations, it's about them. And you kind of give up your control of the conversation when they turn it around onto you or put it on someone else. So for those of us who have watched the season, then you probably know what I'm talking about. If you haven't and you have absolutely no idea what show this is, that's okay. Just think about, a time where you've had to manage someone's performance and they start to talk about everything other than their own responsibility and accountability for the way things are going. They talk about everyone else, they talk about you, and that is no way to take accountability, right? But as the manager, as the HR person, you have to remind the person in the conversation that actually this discussion is about them. So if I were Mary in that moment, if I were the HR person consulting or sharing, mediating, I should say, in that conversation, I would actually stop the conversation and say, "Hey, we need to pause for a second," and then actually redirect and say, "Hey, Christine, just want to remind you, we are here to talk about you and your performance and your behavior because that's not okay. And the way you're acting is not okay." Rather than kind of engaging in this, I almost want to say like cycle and spiral out of control. Because it was like literally an unraveling of emotions. And so, that whenever we're dealing with people, there's always going to be some interpersonal conflict. It's why there are so many HR, employee relations specialties, roles, business partner roles, because there's always going to be someone that needs to kind of deal with the inner workings and interpersonal relationships in a workplace or between people. So the other thing is that we see at the end of the season, and this is, I guess, where there's a spoiler, we see that there is something unethical that happens. Christine basically allegedly pays or bribes a client of another agent's to join her and to work with her. So again, Christine goes to a client that belongs to another agent, bribes them or attempts to bribe them to ditch that agent and come work with her. Obviously unethical if it happened, assuming that it happened. You see in these last episodes that there is a what seems to be like an investigation, a digging into what actually happened. So we first see a report of the issue, meaning the agent who found out that their client was bribed to leave them. That agent, Emma is her name. She reports to Mary that her client told her that Christine attempted to bribe that client away from Emma with a value of like $5,000. And basically, Christine tried to offer this client $5,000 to ditch Emma. And I realize how this sounds. I realize that this sounds very dramatic, but actually this is what would be considered unethical in this environment, right? So that is the situation. And Emma reports this to Mary, which is the right protocol because Mary is her supervisor. And Mary goes on to investigate the claim and actually allegedly speaks with, I say allegedly because I was not there, obviously, but speaks with the client in question, and that the client acknowledged that and shared that Christine attempted to bribe them with $5,000 to leave Emma, and basically, slandered her a little bit too, and said that Christine is trying to sabotage Emma, so on and so forth. And so then we see that Mary reports this to Jason, who is the broker and owner of the brokerage. And there's this moment where then the two of them, Jason and Mary, sit down with Emma in what looked like an HR and manager conversation with an employee that reported a concern. So it was actually pretty cool for me, at least as a total appreciator of these real reality TV shows, to see this HR process unfold. And so they sit down with Emma and they're speaking with her. And Jason says, "Listen, I'm really sorry that you experienced this. I want to understand more. And, if this did happen, that's not okay." And I thought that was amazing because that's exactly what I would advise a manager say when there's been a report or a concern. I think a lot of people are hung up on not, acknowledging certain things because they don't want to, you know, say that it happened if they don't know. We had to call a spade a spade. When someone is reporting a concern, And Emma actually shared that she was concerned about what Christine was capable of and concerned about next steps and her motives and things like that. So really expressing a fear of retaliation, further retaliation from her colleague. When someone does that, regardless of whether it's true or not, you can empathize with them. There's no risk in saying, "I'm really sorry that this happened to you. I want to dig into it. If, I have to make sure that I'm checking all the boxes." You could even say, "I'm really sorry if this happened to you. I'm only hearing this from you so far, and I just want to make sure that I'm, going through the motions. I don't doubt what you're saying, but I do need to go through everything and make sure I'm completely understanding of the full situation." There's no harm in that. I think a lot of HR professionals are afraid of risk in empathizing too much. But, if someone's reporting a claim, it's okay to empathize. It's not to say that you sympathize with them and you commiserate, but you can empathize and you can express concern over the situation, which Jason Oppenheim did. And I thought he did a really good job, actually, of hearing the complaint, hearing the concerns, and empathizing, and then further expressing the expectations of the office and the conduct that ensues within the office. I thought that was really good. He goes on to say, "This is not tolerated. If this happened, it's extremely unethical, and that does not stand here." And so that was really, really cool to see, because that's exactly what you want to do, or what you want a manager to do in a situation like that. Resetting the expectation, even if the person reporting the concern wasn't part of the problem that you know of, you always reset the expectation, because then you know for sure that they are also clear on the expectation for the standard of conduct. So that was really, really good. Then we see, as this further unfolds, Christine was supposed to come in after they spoke with Emma to speak with her. So again, this is part of the investigation, right? Well, I bet you can guess it. Christine did not show up. This happens. This happens in real life. This is, not just a reality TV thing. I'm sure that that was real. When you're dealing with someone who is unaccountable, and you're dealing with someone who potentially doesn't really see fault in their behavior, why would they show up for a meeting that they don't think is important, right? So, when you're dealing with this in real life, there have to be consequences when someone does not show up to work, when they don't show you the same respect, right? I think sometimes I actually spoke with someone recently where they experienced this, where, people involved in an investigation didn't show up for a meeting. It's unacceptable. Actually, it's insubordination, if you ask me. So, you absolutely can remain in control of the situation and reiterate the standard that's expected of those individuals. And I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but if I were Jason, or if I were Mary, I would actually put in writing that that Christine did not show up, and that she's failed to meet expectations, and that at this point she is, not in good standing, and that they need to connect with her because of the importance of the investigation. And I'm sure at some level they did that. I think Jason goes on to try and call her and connect with her. And that's kind of where the episode ends. It ends with this very dramatic closing scene of Christine looking on to, out into the distance of her beautiful home. And so of course it's very cinematic, but the reality is that when you're dealing with the reality of this situation, when someone doesn't show up and you're doing an investigation, you have to work tirelessly to get connected with them. And so I would, in this situation again, send something written saying, "Listen, we need to speak with you." If they don't answer, you follow up and you say, This is really insubordinate. You're not in good standing at this point. This is an outstanding investigation, and it's critical that we give you a fair investigation, so we need to speak with you. When can we meet?" And then at that point, if that person still is not answering, you can consult with an attorney, you can consult with other colleagues, HR colleagues, but you might be in a position to actually issue a warning to this person, or potentially terminate them for insubordination, failure to show up for employment related meetings and things like that, because this is an investigation. Again, in some situations, your investigation may result in suspending someone. This is obviously an unethical thing. So it can, it's a little bit in the gray. I could see where she could be asked not to come back to the office during the investigation. I could see where she would be back in the office for the investigation. That's kind of where the nuance and the culture of your organization comes into these moments, and it's based on the culture of your organization that determines, whether someone is suspended or not. I've been in environments where people are suspended for any investigation that's fairly serious, where it involves ethics, for example, harassment, things like that. And I've been in situations or environments where, suspending people is not the norm. So, depending on the culture of your organization, you may or may not suspend someone when doing an investigation into ethics. In this case, I think we'll find out during the reunion what comes of um, this whole situation. And it's too bad that I'm recording this before the reunion, so I'll have to update on the next episode, I guess. But I would think that this will be the final straw, and that Christine will no longer work at the brokerage because there have been a ton of issues related to her conduct and the interpersonal connections and relationships with her colleagues. And it's not to say that she was always in the wrong. I don't think she was always in the wrong. But when you are not part of the solution, and you guys know I always talk about this, you have to be part of the solution. When you're not part of the solution, all you're doing is shooting yourself in the foot. You are not giving yourself the opportunity to be in better standing or to work through these issues. Instead, it actually looks like you're just the problem. So in this case, I think that's what's going to happen, is that Christine is going to kind of, put the nail in her coffin, and that she's going to make herself look like she's been the problem all along. And I would imagine that she will be fired from the brokerage, just on the basis of this ethical violation, this conduct violation alone, in attempting to bribe a client that obviously has a lot of ethical issues ingrained in it. So, when I think about these shows where we're seeing the dynamics of individuals, I think about this a lot in Real Housewives too. But when we're seeing these dynamics play out, it's really like looking into a workplace, right? When these people are filming together, it's a little bit different because it's Selling Sunset and they actually work together. But I think about Real Housewives, where they don't technically work together, with the exception that they're being paid to be on this reality TV show. But in theory, they're supposed to be friends that are just like constantly filmed together. So it's a little bit different. But their dynamics, you could argue that there would be like a benefit of having an HR person there, but like it would never happen. In Selling Sunset, or even in Below Deck, I'm really digging myself a hole here in the amount of shows that I watch. But you see Below Deck, where everyone who is on the boat, unless they're the guests, of course, everyone on the boat, they're coworkers. So they live and work together. And then you have Selling Sunset, where people are working together, and there's obviously a whole lot of drama that ensues. And what's interesting about Selling Sunset is that they're all real estate agents, so they are all technically contracted employees. They're not employees being paid a salary. So the rules are a little bit different. The conduct, or the tolerance of different conduct violations or performance violations, might be a little bit different. Whereas on Below Deck, they are maybe they're not salaried so much, but they might be paid like a certain base rate. They're definitely paid for their time on the boat. But they're also eligible for tips, right? But they're working alongside each other. They live in the same space. That's really challenging. And we see those dynamics also play out in a way where you could see the benefit of someone mediating some of those situations. At the same time, I think what's really interesting is that in these shows where they don't have HR people, many times they work out their own issues. And so I think actually it provides a good juxtaposition for whether or not, or when, there is a need for an HR person, or an HR person who is helping resolve some conflict. Because I don't know that it's always 100% necessary for HR to get involved. And so we see the benefits sometimes of there being no involvement from anyone on the manager side or HR side, because these people can work out their own issues. And that's where you're able to actually have the best situation possible. Once HR is involved, it becomes a bigger issue. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see specifically for Selling Sunset how everything works out. But, I thought when I was watching last night, I was thinking about how it would be so interesting to talk about this in the concept of the podcast and HR, because I'm sure I'm not the only one here that watches these shows. And if you don't watch or you're not interested, that's okay. Hopefully you can appreciate that there are themes here that absolutely play a role in our day-to-day as HR people or managers, depending on where you are in an organization. So that's my take on the reality TV bubble and all of the ways in which, you know, HR kind of comes to light in these situations. So, with that, I just want to close by adding that I hope that you're enjoying the guest episodes that I've been, putting out there for you. I would love if you take the opportunity to, just rate and review and subscribe. And if you're watching this on video, you see I have a little banner here. I'm testing out this new production to make it so that I just put out what I record, and there hopefully isn't any need to edit. So we're trying it. Thank you for working through this with me and allowing me to try a new format. We'll see how it goes. For now, we're gonna try this intro after the intro, format. But again, I hope that you're enjoying the guest interviews. I mean, some of the people that I've been able to connect with over these last few months, the episodes that have yet to come out, as well as the episodes that have come out, are really, really interesting. And I feel it's beneficial not only for me to connect with them, but for me to share their knowledge with you, because again, these people are thought leaders in their fields, and they're subject matter experts within their organizations and within their industries as well. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, of course, wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast. And with that, I will see you next week.